Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. This is the day we do our program called Mythbusters. Co-host today is Chris Rossini. He is also the editor of our webpage, ronpaullibertyreport.com. Welcome to the program, Chris.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Great topics today again.
Good. I don't know. Are we ever going to run out of myths to try to dispel, or are there still a lot out there?
There's plenty for us to do every week. Let's start with one of our favorite topics with gold. The price continues to rocket yet again this week, and establishment economists are hitting their digital presses hard, trying to talk it down, cool people off, try to divert attention. They're using everything they learned with how to lie with statistics, and but nevertheless, Dr. Paul, gold has rocketed up approximately $135, and it's up about 12% over the last month. And stocks are, you can't say the same about stocks. The paper pushers want us to focus on stocks. But if you could please start talking about gold versus the stock market, and we'll start there.
And of course, if you look at the stocks from the beginning of the year, they've been a disaster. But frequently on television, when I do financial interviews, even when I was in Congress, when I wasn't as free to talk about investments and finances, they would always say, well, it's a terrible investment. At certain times, if you were just investing in gold, yes, it could be, But if you look at the long term, the very long term was $35 an ounce up to $1,800. And of course, there will be corrections. But, gold can be an investment, and a lot of people do it. But quite frankly, I never dealt with gold as just an investment. I saw gold as money and a place to preserve wealth and use it as a reserve. But it actually turns out to be a pretty good investment. Because, for instance, there were a lot of people who had been bearish for gold for a decade or so in the end of the last century. And at the right before the year 2000, right before Bush took over, gold was as low as $270 an ounce. And then it skyrocketed up to $1,800. So if you're a pure investor and you're a trader, that's a big bull market. It went up every year for 10 years. But, the anti-gold people would make fun and say, it's too volatile and it's not worth anything. But it really serves a function as investment as well, especially if you compare it to stock markets. If you compare stocks to the year 2000, just for instance, the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ in nominal terms is way down from where it was when it was well over 5,000 in the year 2000, and now is well below 5,000. But then there's the depreciation of inflation and all. So that's a lousy investment. So if investments are there to preserve wealth, gold has proven over the years. Some people, though, don't recognize that there are cycles in all investment. There's cycles in currencies, there's cycles in commodities, and gold is both a currency and a commodity. So yes, there will be downturns, but long term, it is a real haven and a real safe investment. Today there was a jobs report, and it looked very favorable that the number of people employed went way up. What they didn't read, of course, was that 80% of those jobs were minimum wage jobs. But nevertheless, the perceptions generally were that, in a healthy economy, the Fed is likely to raise interest rates, and that would be negative for gold. But even with the headline news that the jobs position improved, gold still responded. So gold is in a very, very bullish state right now, especially since a year ago. It's up probably 15% around in there. So but more recently it has just gone up much more. But for somebody to say, the Paul Krugman types would say, well, it's a waste, it's not an investment, it's a terrible thing. But those who are looking for safety, you don't just compare it to putting your money in a savings account Right now it's negative. Even with a fraction of a percentage of interest, it's still negative because you pay taxes on it, you have depreciation of it, and they're talking about negative interest rates. You can't save. It's the worst savings you could conceive of. You're better off on the conditions that we are developing, especially if we have negative interest rates, would be to put your money in a shoebox. Of course, the government worries about that people might save paper money instead of putting it in the bank, and that's not what they want. So they are working on the program of abolishing cash because they want everybody to spend. They actually try to convince people that spending is the way the economy operates. So the government has to spend, Congress has to spend, people have to spend, and then the economy will all be okay. They don't understand anything about savings. But savings in terms of having something of real value like gold is part of a free market. And it's been around for a lot of years, like 6,000 years it's been used as money. So for them to come along and say that that gold is a bad investment and gold is not money is a total myth. The myth is that paper money lasts forever. Paper money has never lasted for long periods of time, and that myth is being undermined right now, and they're making the money managers hysterical, and the central banks are determined to try to prove to the world that saving and using gold as money and as an investment is a total myth. Well, they're wrong on that one. Eventually, they'll figure it out.
Yes, eventually they will figure it out. It won't be pretty, but they'll figure it out. Next, Dr. Paul, let's cover some buzzwords. Now, politicians love to keep these in their verbal tool belts because whenever they use certain words, they expect a reaction out of the public. The most famous, or one of the most famous, is national security. Boy, if they say national security, like Pavlovian dogs, Americans are supposed to just lay down, roll over, and just sacrifice it all for national security. So, yeah. Dr. Paul, please cover this myth and how we can get out of this mind meld that they've formed.
Well, this is indeed a big myth because it drives so much of our policy, domestic economic policy, the policy that attacks our civil liberties, and it gives support to the neoconservatives and their lapdogs for our interventions overseas. So national security, because everybody is for national security. I'm for national security. I just happen to think that those who lie about national security, that we have to do all these things, are making us less safe. But national security, all you have to do is announce that we have to go into Iraq and start a war for national security reasons. Why we have to put weapons around the Russian border for national security. We have to be involved in dictating what governments in Ukraine and Syria because of national security. We have to be in Libya for national security. And we have to have the Patriot Act, and we have to have the TSA for national security and personal security. It goes on and on. And the tool that they use is an ancient tool. All the government has to do is saying, well, we're being attacked. We've had people come here and attack us. We've had people kill Americans overseas. It's unsafe. So therefore, we're being attacked. And if you come across as saying, well, I think there's a different policy. We don't have to be so vulnerable. We don't have to have this foreign policy. We don't need a war to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Then they'll say, oh, you're a peacenik. You're one of these American blame America first people, and you're unpatriotic, and you don't care about the troops, and on and on. Every budget for the military-industrial complex every year is always national security, national security. All the Republican candidates right now are for more spending on our military budget for national security because and it's not for the fear. They don't pretend somebody's going to invade us. It's just that around the world we have to protect our oil and our security, and we have to be in charge, and we have to arrest people when they're doing bad things in other countries. So it's always the mantra that national security is so important that it justifies just about anything. And unfortunately, security is something that the and safety is something that the founders addressed indirectly. They never talked about how will the new government, our new federal government, how will we use the Constitution to make us all safe? Well, they gave us the Second Amendment to make us safe. Who makes us safe at home? We as individuals make ourselves safe. Who makes the children safe? It's not the liberal do-gooders who will protect all the children. It's the parents and the neighborhood that protects the children. But no, it has to be the government is going to make us safe and secure. And of course, it fails. And because there's so many threats coming, they say, well, we have to protect you, and that's why they invent laws like the Patriot Act, and they make us less secure because they take away our liberties. And right now, we fear our government, and the statistics show this. We still fear our government the most, but the disconnect is those who fear the government and are unhappy with it are supporting all the candidates right now support more government. So, and that doesn't work. And this is encryption argument. There's, I don't know of any of the candidates who have come out with a reasonable approach to say, and that we have a right for encryption. Encryption is designed, is a market manifestation of individuals trying to protect against the intrusiveness of big government. And this is good because governments should do that, but they don't. They're the worst culprits in undermining our liberties, and guns as well. Just think of how many federal guns and federal bureaucrats and police are always, invading our homes and threatening that if we don't pay our fair share, you're going to go to jail for life because you're not obeying the IRS, or you're teaching people that the IRS is unconstitutional in the way they collect taxes. So yes, we have things twisted around, but we're supposed to roll over because it's national security. I would say that the best defense for our national security would be liberty in this country, and for the people to be free and to have a healthy economy, have civil liberties here, and then there will be no outside threats, and hopefully someday we'll have no internal threats from our own government.
Yes, and one of the most important things is for people to really understand what freedom and free markets means, because it gets muddled all the time, and that's going to be our next topic. And it's a bit of a comic relief too. I was on Twitter and I saw a tweet from Bernie Sanders about Detroit, and we know that Detroit was a bastion of big government, big unions, and all that. And Bernie Sanders, this is what he wrote. The people of Detroit know the real cost of Hillary Clinton's free trade policies. So that's what he's blaming Detroit on. Dr. Paul, please clear that up.
Well, I think there might be a couple myths there. First, Hillary's hardly the person to attack for too much freedom in trade and too much free market. But the other fallacy is that freedom and free markets and free trade are the culprit and has caused Detroit to go bankrupt. What they will not address, and this goes for both sides, they will not address the subject of debt. And it is massively accumulated with both parties, and that's why I argue both parties are exactly the same. And the burden of debt is the biggest threat to us internally and internationally, for that matter. And right now, we have unfunded liabilities of $210 trillion, that there's no money in the bank, no investment. Now, if an insurance company did this, they'd be arrested for fraud because they have to be able to fund the people they insure. If they have zero, it'd be called a Ponzi scheme. But they have to have assets where they can pay their insurance policy holders. But the government has no assets to back up the unfunded liabilities. What they have are the guns. They have guns, they can tax, they can borrow, which is a terrible thing. Jefferson tried to prevent that. But then they also have a printing press. They have all forms of pretending they can fund the unfunded liabilities. And they've done a pretty good job because we've been a very wealthy country, and we have been blessed with this freakish accident of being able to issue the reserve currency of the world, which has delayed the inevitable correction that the markets will demand. But this whole idea that Hillary Clinton is at fault because she was too much for freedom, that is indeed a myth. And it's indeed a myth that Detroit is a result of too much freedom. It is a result of too much government and too much debt and too many government employees. And I get to thinking, these communities, cities and states and counties go bankrupt because of the employees. And when they have a healthy economy, they seem to be able to afford it. But they have too many employees, they get paid too much, they can retire at a very young age, they have lucrative retirement programs. But everything, even from firemen up to the policemen, you say, well, you need these people. Well, you don't need as many as we have, and they don't need to have these kind of benefits. School teachers, the public school system is so inefficient. We spend so much money on the buildings. The kids don't get a good education. They certainly don't ever get taught a good economic policy or a good perspective on history. So there's a lot of reason they go broke, and then the regulations and the taxation ruins the business climate in a city like Detroit and Chicago and so many northern cities. So many people have moved out. The conditions were somewhat better in the South. They moved down there and they did better. But when the major crisis, comes about, and we're in the middle of it now, it's beginning. It's going to affect the whole country because the country is in debt, and it will even affect the military budget, and once again it's going to affect national security. Of course, in some ways it might help because we might quit spending money on more weapons that we don't need to protect our national security. But it is indeed a myth to blame too much freedom on the tragedy that we're facing today in the major cities and the tragedy of the wiping out of the middle class, which is talked about now both by Republicans and Democrats, and yet they never deal with the fact that they both endorse Keynesian economics, paper money system, the business cycle according to the Fed, and on and on. Nobody really attacks spending. And over my lifetime, there's never been an administration, Republican or Democrat, that actually cut anything of substance. The budget always goes up, debt goes up, deficits go up. It's continuous. And what do? They respond by more government, more regulation, and more money. That is a fallacy. That is a myth that is coming to be absolutely proven wrong.
Yes, Republicans and Democrats, they're two parties, but they're part of the one-party state, as we like to say.
Right.
And finally, Dr. Paul, let's finish up. It's electoral season, so let's talk about voting and some of the myths that surround this sacrament of the state, as some libertarians call it. Americans are taught from a young age that you have to vote, and if you don't, it's as if you're committing some kind of cardinal sin. And if at the very least, you're told just vote for the lesser evil, which is great from government's perspective. Right. As you have pointed out, the government goes in one direction. So, Dr. Paul, what do you think about this myth, and do people have to feel so guilty if they can't choose an evil to support?
Yeah, and this has been around for a long time. But, my very first election was a special election, and the state of Texas was totally Democratic. And we only had 3 Republican congressmen. But it was a special election, which means that getting certain people to vote made all the difference in the world. The district was held by a Democrat, and he resigned from office, so there was a special election. So I didn't want everybody to vote because they were mostly Democrat. But by working hard and finding supporters and getting them out, sure, you want, if you're going to try to work within the system, you want the people to come out and vote that's going to vote for you. But why this generalized statement, everybody should vote? It's sort of like a false belief in democracy, pure democracy. Everybody votes, and then they can manipulate the votes and bring people together. And I fear that the more that vote and the more the special interests come together, the more the dictatorship of the majority can rule and alter the rights of the minority, and that's generally what happens. And so they're always arguing that we need more people to vote. And why should this be the case because nothing really changes. So I would say, yeah, under these conditions, getting out and voting and trying to change things, it's a vehicle for trying to change people's attitude. But the statement made by some libertarians, they say they don't vote. I don't vote. They don't vote because they don't want to encourage them. They don't want to encourage the politicians to actually think that there's support out there because the system is so flawed. And these predictions were made early on by the founders that if you have the purity of democracy, the people will finally get together, those who want handouts, rich and poor and middle class, they will get together and vote themselves largesse, which will lead to deficits and a system which is ruined and productivity goes down. So the prediction was there, the pure democracy, if everybody's voting to get more stuff. Now, idealistically, if people's attitudes change, maybe voting for less government. Sometimes they vote for less government, but only to a degree. You know, the Tea Party movement was sort of usurped from one of our campaigns, but one thing they did was they kept talking about the deficits, but they never came up with precise things, but they always had the addendum, but don't cut the military. We have to have the military. So there's not much a consistency on people wanting to cut, so that's why I don't predict that we'll get enough votes ever there to do the right thing. The whole process is going to come down on our heads precisely because of universal voting and the right of people to vote for their things. That is why if you have a constitution that is strictly adhered to, which the founders tried to do, it wouldn't be so bad. But unfortunately, human nature is such that no matter what the constitutions of any country says, there's always this gravitation to people who, I'm in charge, I'm the boss, I'll take care of you, and just trust me. And that, of course, is a system that doesn't lead to more liberty or a better standard of living. So the myth that all we have to do is get more people to vote and everything will be okay, that is indeed a myth.
Yes, I totally agree. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Okay, Chris, and I want to thank you for being with us today on Mythbusters. I want to thank all the viewers today for joining us, and please come back soon to the Liberty Report.